Welcome to Huawei Firewall Multimedia Configuration Tutorial. In this course, you will learn how to configure the Ssl Vpn on the USG 6000 series firewall. First, let's look at the network topology. The firewall is connected to the internet through the WAN interface, and to the intranet through the LAN interface. There are two internet segments. Employees on the move or working at home set up Ssl Vpn connections to the WAN interface of the firewall for intranet access. The Ssl Vpn configuration consists of 4 steps: configure Ssl Vpn users and authenticate access users. Configure the Ssl Vpn. Configure security policies. Users log into the Ssl Vpn portal and use the Ssl Vpn to access the intranet. Users are configured under the user object. The first step is to create an authentication domain. If local authentication is used, you need to enter only the name of the authentication domain, and keep default settings for other parameters. Then select the created authentication domain under the user group node. Create a user under the authentication domain. Enter the username. Password. Confirm password. Repeat this step to create more users. If you need to create many users and manage them by groups, you can create user groups. After a user group 1 is created, select Users. Click Batch Modify. Change the user group to Group 1. After that, the selected users are added to Group 1. If a third-party authentication server is used to authenticate Ssl Vpn users, you need to configure the authentication server on the firewall. Let's take the AD server as an example. Click Add to create an AD server, and enter the name. Primary authentication server IP and port. Primary server host name. If multiple AD servers are available, enter the IP address and host name of the secondary servers. In secondary authentication server IP port and secondary server host name. Enter the AD server's base DN, administrator DN and administrator password. After the configuration is complete, click Detection to check whether the configuration is correct. In Test Account, enter the existing account and password on the AD server. If the configuration is correct, the system will display a success after you click Detection. Next, configure the authentication domain. It should be noted that the authentication domain name must be the same as that configured on the authentication server when AD or LDAP authentication is used on the firewall. In this example, the domain name on the AD server is cc.com. Therefore, the domain name on the firewall must also be configured as cc.com. Then bind the authentication domain with the previously created AD server. After that, create a server import policy in user import to import the user accounts and organizational structure from the authentication server to the firewall. Enter the name of the import policy. Select the previously created AD server. Click Select. Connect to the authentication server and select the user groups to be imported. In this example, Group 1 and Group 2 are imported from the authentication server to the firewall. The target user group set to cc.com. You are advised to select both incremental synchronization and full synchronization. With incremental synchronization, the firewall synchronizes new users or user groups from the authentication server at set intervals. With full synchronization, the firewall synchronizes all users and organizational structure information from the authentication server, daily or weekly. After the import policy is configured, if you click Import immediately, user and group information can be immediately imported to the firewall from the server. Choose Network. Ssl Vpn. Click Add. The Ssl Vpn Configuration Wizard is displayed. First, complete the Ssl Vpn Gateway configuration. Enter the name of the gateway. Set the gateway IP address to the IP address of WAN interface. You can use the default port 443, or change it to another port. If the user connects to the gateway using a domain name, enter the domain name of the gateway. If the user logs into the virtual gateway using a USB key, or soft certificate, configure the local certificate, client CA certificate, and certificate authentication method. This video uses the username password login method as an example. Therefore, keep the default settings. There will be a dedicated tutorial video to illustrate how to configure Ssl Vpn certificate authentication. Set the authentication domain to the previously created authentication domain, cc.com. If the remote access user needs to access intranet resource servers using domain names, you need to configure the DNS server. If users need to access intranet resource servers using IP addresses, the DNS server is not needed. Maximum number of users is the maximum number of users allowed to be configured on the Ssl Vpn gateway, including local and imported users. Maximum concurrent users is the maximum number of concurrent online users allowed by the Ssl Vpn gateway. You can purchase licenses to increase this number. The next step is to configure SSL and SSL session aging time. The SSL version used by the firewall must match the SSL version supported by Ssl VPN terminals. Otherwise, the SSL negotiation will fail. For example, if a terminal uses TLS version 1 and SSL version 3, in SSL version on the firewall, you must select TLS version 1, or SSL version 3, or both. Keep the default settings in encryption suite. If the terminal runs on Windows XP, deselect DES and triple DES. Session timeout indicates the timeout period before the connection is removed if no traffic is transferred on the VPN. Lifecycle controls the lifetime of a VPN. The VPN is disconnected as long as the lifecycle comes to an end, no matter whether there is traffic flowing on the VPN. After the VPN is disconnected, the user needs to relog into the gateway to continue to access resources. If unrestricted lifecycle is selected, the VPN is always connected. Ssl compression is to compress SSL sessions to enhance the data transfer efficiency to a certain extent. After that, enable several VPN services and check the usage and configuration methods of these services. Web proxy allows VPN users to access intranet web servers through proxy. The detailed process is as follows. After an Ssl VPN connection is set up between a user and the firewall, the user's request for accessing intranet web servers is encrypted by the VPN tunnel and sent to the firewall. Then the firewall proxies the request to a web server. The server response will also be forwarded by the firewall to the user. There are two web proxy methods: web rewriting and web link. The former is used to rewrite the URL of the web server for URL hiding. For example, in this topology, the actual URL of the server is this one. After web rewriting, the URL displayed to the user is this one. Web link does not rewrite URLs. The URLs displayed to users are actual URLs. Although web rewriting can hide server URLs for higher security, it may cause misplaced images and abnormal fonts. If such problems occur, use web link for replacement. Next, let's look at the configuration method of web proxy. Click Add to create a web proxy resource. Enter the resource name. Set the resource type to web rewriting or web link, and enter the URL of the web resource. If you select Display in URL Display State, web proxy resources will be displayed on the portal page of the Ssl VPN. Users can click resource names to access the resource items. If you do not select it, resources will not be displayed on the portal page. In this case, users need to enter the URL on the portal page and click Go to access the resource. Resource group is used to group web resources. You can add resources of a type to the same resource group so that users can filter resources by type on the portal page. Display priority in resource group determines the sequence of web proxy resource groups on the portal page. The resources are displayed in descending order of priority from left to right. The network extension function is used to allocate intranet IP addresses to VPN users, to allow them to communicate with any internet host just like intranet users. After network extension is enabled on the VPN terminal, a virtual network adapter will be installed, and the firewall will allocate an IP address to this virtual adapter. Meanwhile, a route to the intranet will be delivered to the terminal, with the next hop pointing at the virtual network adapter. When a user initiates an access request to an intranet host, the request packet is forwarded to the virtual network adapter, based on the routing table for encapsulation. After encapsulation, the source and destination IP addresses of the packet are the IP addresses of the virtual network adapter and the intranet host to be accessed respectively. Afterwards, the packet will be sent to the physical network adapter of the PC for secondary encapsulation. After encapsulation, the source and destination IP addresses of the packet are the IP addresses of the physical network adapter and the WAN interface of the firewall respectively. Then the packet is encapsulated by the VPN tunnel and sent to the firewall. The firewall decapsulates the packet and sends it to the intranet host. The response of the intranet host is returned to the VPN user over the same path. The configuration of network extension consists of two parts: IP address pool and accessible intranet subnet. The IP address pool is a set of IP addresses to be allocated to virtual network adapters. IP addresses in the address pool must not be the same as that of any firewall interface or intranet host. Besides, intranet routers must have routes to the address pool, with the next hops pointing at the firewall. The other configuration item is the accessible intranet subnet. After an accessible intranet subnet is configured, the firewall will deliver routes pointing at the subnet to VPN terminals. Besides, upon receiving the decapsulated packet, the firewall will check whether the destination address exists in the accessible subnet, and discard the packet as no match is found. That is to say, if a user manually adds a route to the intranet subnet on the VPN terminal, with the next hop pointing to the virtual network adapter, but the destination subnet of the route not in the accessible subnet configured on the firewall, the firewall will block the user's access requests. File sharing allows VPN users to securely access intranet file servers directly using a browser. Common file operations, such as add, modify, upload, and download are supported. It is easy to configure file sharing. Click Add to create a file sharing resource. Enter a resource name. Enter the path of the folder to be shared. And select the file sharing protocol. After that, the portal page shows the corresponding link. Click the link to access the folder on the server. As mentioned above, Web Proxy is used to open intranet web servers to VPN users through Ssl Vpn. To open non-web servers such as FTP and mail servers to VPN users, the port forwarding function is required. In the following example, we will create a port forwarding task to open port 21 of the FTP server at 10.1.2.10 to VPN users. After the VPN terminal sets up in Ssl Vpn with the firewall, and accesses the intranet FTP server at 10.1.2.10, the packet will be forwarded to the firewall through the VPN tunnel, and then to the intranet FTP server. If automatic enabling is selected on the client, port forwarding is enabled once the user logs into the portal page. Otherwise, port forwarding needs to be manually enabled. If Preserve Connections is selected, the SSL connection between the VPN terminal and the firewall never ages. It prevents the VPN terminal from being disconnected due to connection timeout, which may interrupt the port forwarding service. Host check is used to check whether any remote sharing or screenshot program is enabled on the user's terminal, whether the operating system of the terminal complies with requirements, and whether antivirus software is installed on the terminal. If the host check fails, the firewall does not allow the terminal to use the Ssl Vpn. If deny double hop remote desktop is selected, the firewall checks whether the terminal is controlled by other PCs using remote sharing programs. The firewall can check Windows Remote Desktop, PC Anywhere, and VNC by default. After anti-snapshot is selected, the firewall denies Ssl Vpn access terminals from using snapshot software. For example, if a terminal clicks the print screen key after accessing the Ssl Vpn, the Ssl Vpn connection will be removed. Other snapshot software that can be checked by the firewall by default include HyperSnap, Snagit, EasyCapture, Snipping Tool, and RDFSnap. To enable the firewall to check other remote sharing or snapshot software, configure host check policies. You can create host check rules to disable remote sharing programs by window name, port, or MD5 checksum. Snapshot programs can also be specified by window name or MD5 checksum. Additionally, host check rules can be used to monitor antivirus software, firewall software, operating system versions, open ports, running process, stored files, and registries on terminals. Certain non-snapshot programs may also register the print screen key with anti-snapshot as enabled. If a terminal uses such software, the firewall mistakenly considers the software as snapshot software and removes the Ssl Vpn connection. To avoid this problem, add such software to an anti-snapshot whitelist by process name or MD5 checksum. Role authorization is used to control services and resources accessible to users. For example, create the role, Role 1. Associate the role with users or user groups. Select services accessible to the associated users and user groups. Select accessible resources. Pay attention to the difference in role authorization between local authentication and server authentication. For local authentication, user permissions are the combination of the permissions of the roles associated with the user and the user's direct parent groups. For server authentication, user permissions are the permissions of the roles associated with the user's direct parent groups. The device provides a default role default, which can be modified, but cannot be deleted. If a user and the user's direct parent group are not associated with any role, the user has the permissions of the default role. As long as the user or the user's direct parent group is associated with a role, the user's permission is controlled by the associated role. The configuration of the security policies for web proxy, file sharing, and port forwarding consists of two parts. First, security policy for the untrusted local interzone. This policy allows setting up an Ssl Vpn, and allows a VPN terminal to send packets to the firewall through the Ssl Vpn. The source address is set to any, destination address to that of the WAN interface, service to HTTPS, and action to permit. Second, security policy for the local zone to server area direction. In this example, it is the security policy for the local to trust interzone. This policy allows setting up a connection between the firewall and resource server. The source address is set to any, destination address to that of the resource server, and action to permit. The security policy configuration for network extension is more complicated. It also consists of two parts. One is the security policy for the untrusted local interzone, which is the same as that for web proxy. The other is the security policy for the firewall to internet host direction. The source security zone is not local, and needs to be determined by reserve route lookup. Firstly, to make the network extension function available, You must ensure that a route to the network extension address pool exists on the firewall. The next hop can point to the internet or extranet. This route is not used to forward packets but to implement reverse route lookup for determining the source security zone. The detailed process is as follows. After receiving a packet sent by a user, the firewall decapsulates it, looks up the routing table based on the destination address of the packet, finds the outgoing interface, and determines its destination security zone. Rather than simply taking the security zone where the WAN interface resides as the source security zone, the firewall looks up the routing table for the outgoing interface of the source address, and takes the security zone where the outgoing interface resides as the source security zone. In this network topology, both the source and destination security zones are the trust zone, where intranet interfaces reside. Therefore, both the source and destination security zones are configured as trust in the security policy. The source address is set to the network extension address pool, destination address to the accessible intranet subnet, and action to permit. After the firewall configuration is complete, let's look at how to use Ssl Vpn. First, access the URL of the Ssl Vpn gateway using a browser. Install ActiveX controls. Enter the username and password. Log into the portal page. To access intranet web servers, click the link under Web Proxy. To access files shared on intranet file servers, click the link under File Sharing. To access a file server, you need to enter the username and password of the file server. After login, you can download files, delete files, rename files, upload files, create folders. Click Start under Port Forwarding to enable port forwarding. If the function is in enabled state after the user logs into the portal page, the automatic enabling option is enabled on the firewall. With the port forwarding function, users need to use common software to access resources, rather than directly clicking links in the resource list. For example, after port forwarding is enabled, a user can use the FTP client to access intranet FTP servers. Network extension can be enabled in either of the following method. Method 1. Click Enable on the portal page. Method 2. Enable the function on a network extension client. The network extension client can be downloaded from the user options on the portal page. After the client is installed, run it. Enter the gateway address and URL. Enter the username and password and click Login to enable network extension. If multiple VPN gateways are available, add all of them in IP option. And enable Auto Best Link selected. After that, click Login. The client will select to connect to a gateway with the shortest delay. We've completed the course. Thank you for staying with us.